Minimalism is a topic that has gained tremendous traction in the last 30 years. For a little more than I have been alive, 21st century minimalism has become a bigger topic of discussion, and the average American has some idea of what the phrase means. If one was to look for minimalism in modern day life, they may look to a lack of possessions, the clothing that one wears, or a lack of clutter. Well, except in the junk drawer. Thoreau can't be defined by these features. Judging his take on minimalism will require an adjusted, but not a new scope on what minimalism means. To alter our thinking slightly, consider minimalism as needs over wants. Eliminating the fad of life, wherever that may be found, is an important part of Thoreau's philosophy. In Walden, he writes, "Think of dashing the hopes of a morning with a cup of warm coffee, or the evening with a dish of tea. Ah, how low I feel when I am tempted by them." Someone says they're willing to give up coffee in order to achieve more clarity. They may have some wacky ideas, but perhaps there's a wealth of wisdom under the molehill of brazenness. For those who missed reading Walden, Thoreau builds a house on land an acquaintance allowed him to use and lives in it for 2 years, spending time reflecting on his life, taking notes on society and man's expectations with advancing civilization, and living off what a few hours, weeks, and seasons of labor on the land can provide him. While his time at Walden Pond does involve money, it is not a central focus of his existence. This is a stark difference compared to how his contemporaries lived even for the 1800s. If he did not pursue monetary wealth, then what did Thoreau pursue? Nothing. Some may not realize that Thoreau did travel outside of the woods from time to time, going to a tailor or having dinner with friends. Several times he notes that he has visitors at his home. Minimalism kicks in when he notes that his guests did not expect a meal to be served, but they had a banquet of conversation to relish in. His abode was not a place to show off to those who came to visit, but a vessel for which they can exchange ideas and company. Despite being able to expand further upon the land that he farms, Thoreau consciously opts to not harvest more than he can handle or more than he needs. While he notes that he could farm huckleberries and profit off of them, he ultimately decides that he would be equally happy without them. One way Thoreau still connects with modern society is his beliefs towards the pursuit of luxuries to the point of our detriment. He rails against this in much of Walden, citing the push to establish more transportation across the United States, constant recycling of news, and working tirelessly for ways to simplify living. Yet men have come to such a pass that they frequently starve, not for want of necessities, but for want of luxuries. And I know a good woman who thinks that her son lost his life because he took to drinking water only. Rather than flailing against suggested turmoils, Thoreau believes that we should embrace a simpler way of living. In one scenario, he notes that a train ticket would cost several days' worth of earnings, and that he could travel the same distance in 1 day of walking and gain much more from observing nature on the way. With modern conveniences, many of us may be tempted to drive a car for a quarter of a mile to get lunch, but Thoreau notes that we would be missing an abundance of nature's joys by avoiding traveling on foot. Living within one's means was at the core of Thoreau's beliefs as well. For him, and likely most of America today, survival was a mere triviality, so earning enough took little time off of his schedule. Rather than asking how much he could earn and all of the things he could obtain, Thoreau explains that understanding how little one needs to be happy is a key to being free. Understanding one's necessary items and actions to achieve happiness is a staple of minimalism, and Thoreau represents this by craving little beyond what the earth or lightly working the land can provide him. While some of Thoreau's ideas on philanthropy may seem unusual, one point hits minimalism square on target. If thy hand has plenty, be as liberal as the date tree, but if it affords nothing to give away, be an azad or a free man like the cypress. Working solely for the advancement of others will not lead to happiness, but spreading additional provisions and still providing happiness is an important idea of his and represents the form of minimalism that he follows. At times we need to be reminded that the endeavors and challenges we take are not the entirety of our lives. Thoreau lived at Walden Pond for 2 years, but he eventually decided to leave. At the conclusion of Walden, he writes, "I left the woods for as good a reason as I went there. Perhaps it seemed to me that I had several more lives to live and could not spare any more time for that one." Thoreau's experiment was exactly that. 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days spent in the woods as an attempt to live outside of the normal expectations of what a man within his society was to do. He showed that rising simply to work in a pursuit of further riches and a more comfortable life is not necessary to reaching a point of contentedness. Life is extremely rich, especially in nature, and this is capable of providing a life full of tranquility. He fights against the notion that a bigger home, better transportation lines, or finer property will increase our happiness. In short, I am convinced, both by faith and experience, that to maintain oneself on this earth is not a hardship but a pastime, if we live simply and wisely. While Thoreau didn't necessarily live in a world where technology updated every year and people were pressured to keep up with fashion and social media, he certainly had some impressive ideas about how minimalism could be implemented into one's life. In the world Thoreau illustrates throughout Walden, the enjoyments of life are not of gathering news, earning more money, or even expanding the world, but establishing survival and relishing in the earth that we were bestowed and bestowed upon. Thoreau was a minimalist at Walden Pond and an essentialist at his core.